Hi, AP Psychos, and welcome back. Today we are continuing to learn about social influence. So, if you remember in our last video, we talked about conformity and obedience, right? So, when and why do we adjust our behavior in the presence of others, right? And so today, what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit more about group behavior, but I want to talk about some very specific behaviors that we see that happen only when human beings are in a group setting, right? And so we're going to talk about 6 different types of group behavior. First is social facilitation. Okay. So social facilitation is the idea that when you are performing, right, that you do better and that your performance is intensified when others are watching. This is basically the psychology behind home team advantage, right? That you do better when people are watching you, when there's somebody there to kind of like see how amazing you're doing, right? And so people who are good, experts excel. If you're doing kind of like a simple activity, something kind of fun, or like you're doing a race or something, like you're going to go faster in front of an audience. However, if you are new to something, like if you are brand new to playing basketball and you've never done it before, and then all these people are watching you, you're going to do worse. And that's called social inhibition. So that's really like the caveat. Like most of the time, social facilitation, but sometimes not so much. So, for people who already know that they're good at it, right? For people who already feel confident in their skills, the presence of other people pumps their adrenaline, but it brings them to that place in Yerkes Dodson where they have like the best arousal, or the medium arousal gives them the best performance. However, if you are new to something, right, that motivation, that adrenaline rushing, this is Shatta 2 factor, right? You label it as anxiety as opposed to motivation, right? And that labeling has a huge impact on how you do. Okay, social loafing. So this is not new to you. You know Miss Schaefer hates social loafers. People slack off when they're in a group project, right? The tendency for people to show less effort when they're not going to be held individually accountable, right? So all the time, almost in school, I'm guessing on a daily basis, you see this happen. That like if somebody is not going to be held accountable for their individual part of something, they don't put in the effort that everyone else puts in, right? And this happens when your contribution isn't rewarded or punished. So, for example, if you don't get recognized for doing a great job, or if you don't get punished for not doing anything, you don't really care what anyone thinks because why does it matter? If you feel like you're actually not needed to help, like, oh, they're fine without me. And, ultimately, you kind of like, so the idea here is like with tips, sometimes that some restaurants pool their tips. And the idea is like, I'm going to get an equal share of the tips even if I don't bring in that many. So like what's my incentive to bring in a lot? Right? And that's that last part. They feel free to like cheat when they get an equal share. Okay, the next one is called de-individuation. And this is the idea that when you are in a group setting, there is a loss of self-awareness, self-restraint, or self-control, either one of those words, that happens. So when you think about mass group, concerts or venues, anytime a whole lot of people get together and then somehow complete chaos breaks out, this is because of de-individuation, right? Nobody acts the way that these people are acting in these pictures on their own. Well, not nobody, but the majority of people, right? But all of a sudden, when you're in a group and you're like one of a bunch of people, and then your arousal gets kicking, your adrenaline, and no one really, you're kind of anonymous, right? Because it's like, oh, no one really knows you, right? And no one can really point to you and find you. You get this sense of confidence, and then you completely lose all self control, right? In order to get these pictures, what I typed in is sports riots. Like these are people after their teams won or lost a game, right? And this is what happens. Okay. And the one example that I really like that isn't so much portrayed here is that online bullying. Like I call this electronic courage, right? So no one knows who you are, right? They don't see your face. They don't see anything, you don't have to look at them in the eye. And so people feel this sense of courage to write or post or do whatever they think they want to do without really considering the impact. All right, next is group polarization. So if you think of this as like the north and south poles, like extremes from each other, right? So when people of similar views form a group, so like if I am a dog lover and I get in a group with other dog lovers, then by the time I leave that group, I'm going to love dogs even more than I did before, and like think that cats are even worse than I already thought they were, right? And so ultimately what happens is the more time I spend with people like me, the more polarized I become in my belief. Okay. And we talked about this a little bit about how, like, Facebook and Twitter and all of the and Google searches and the way that these algorithms, the way that these algorithms work, that they like give you information that they think that you'll want to look at, but then you're only looking at information that's similar to your own, and like then all you're getting is more information that fits with what you already know, and so this can be really dangerous. And if you look over here in this chart, the example here they talk about is prejudice. So when people who have a prejudice beliefs or ideas, when they're with other people who are prejudiced and discussing them, by the end, they actually are more prejudiced than when they started. And if you talk about people who have low prejudice and they get together with a group of other people who are like minded, they have even less prejudice than when they started. So, yeah, of course, this can be something stupid like dogs and cats, but it can be something really important like prejudice, or something really, really polarizing like politics and abortion and stem cell research and all of these topics that are important in our society. Okay, the next one is called groupthink. So this is kind of confusing because the word think makes you believe that, like, oh, in groups people think, but it's actually the opposite. So it's the idea that in a group you really don't want to cause a problem, right? Especially if you're in a group and like you are like not the leader of the group. So like let's say you're in a group and maybe there's like a boss and you're all like coworkers, or you're all equals, right? And you don't want to be the one that like does the unpopular idea, or like makes the or says like, hey guys, I don't think that's a good idea when everyone else is agreeing. So you just zip it, right? And what happens we find is that groupthink prevents groups from thinking. They prevent groups from giving lots of options and kind of really doing the pros and cons. And everybody just goes along with what they think everybody else wants in order to promote harmony, right? That they don't want to fight, they don't want to argue, they don't want to have drama, right? Save it for your mama, all right? Okay, so the next or the last group behavior that I want to talk about is called the bystander effect. So you've seen this happen because you are in a high school and you're a teenager, and I'm sure you've seen a fight. And sometimes people need help in fights, and all that usually happens is people stand around and watch and don't help, right? So what is this about, right? So this is called the bystander effect. That there can be crowds of people around someone who's suffering and nobody helps, right? And this seems counterintuitive because usually we think of like safety in numbers, but that's not the case when you are not part of the group that you're in, right? So for example, like if you need help and it's a group of your friends, you might be more likely to get the help. But if you're like in a crowd, so it's not necessarily you know these people and you need help, everybody's going to think that somebody else will help you. And this is called diffusion of responsibility. So it's like, oh, they'll do it. Oh, they'll do it. Oh, they'll do it. This is also what you will see, like it kind of links back to Stanley Milgram's shock experiment, that there was this diffusion of responsibility towards the experimenter. So you saw it there with authoritarian or obedience to authority, and you see it here with the bystander effect. And it also, what's important is conformity, that like people in a group follow each other. So if nobody in the group helps, nobody else goes and helps. And sometimes it just takes like one person to like step out there and help people, and other people will start to do it, right? And we're going to talk about some examples of this in class, where they've seen kind of this effect happen, and how you can be that one person, right? How you can make the change and how you can kind of step out and not come victim to the, or not fall victim to the bystander. What are some things that can influence this? So if somebody like appears to be deserving of our assistance, then we're more likely to help. If somebody is dressed like us, or is a woman over a male, or if there's some sort of small town where kind of people tend to know each other more, you're more likely to get help. Ultimately, when somebody, like when we go up to, or like when we go to a person who needs help, like we might feel some guilt if we saw somebody else just help them and we don't try. Like that's that conformity thing. If we're not in a hurry, right? So if we don't have something going on, or we're not in a rush. And ultimately, what's really kind of interesting is that one of the strongest predictors is if you're in a good mood, right? Feel good, do good phenomenon. Linking back to motivation and emotion, right? Okay, so last thing is that a lot of things can happen in groups, and groups can be really scary places. But that doesn't mean that as a human being, you lose all capacity to be an individual and to do amazing things. And so, in all parts of life, in all cultures, in all stories, in all examples we have around the world, like wars and terrible tragedies, there are people who resisted obeying and conforming, right? And these people had incredible power. If you think about specifically with Nazi Germany, you think about the people who gave up their lives, or not gave them up, but kind of put their lives out there to help those of them, help people who were being persecuted, right, by the Nazi regime. And they resisted obeying and conforming. They resisted being a bystander like so many other people did when they looked the other way. And an individual can really do something amazing. Think about like Gandhi and Mother Teresa. Like there are people in this world that we think of that have done amazing things in their lifetime. And groupthink doesn't always, stop people from saying what they think, especially if you know about it, right? So if you know about the groupthink and you know that probably no one's saying anything and you speak up, you can like really help the group make better decisions. So that's all for now, AP Psychos. And remember, psychology is flippin' awesome.